Of all the country singers that helped forge the country music outlaw sound, none had greater success, in my opinion, than Hank Williams Jr. Of all the outlaws, he is my favorite, and I couldn't be happier that he's going into the Hall of Fame. In this video, I hope to show some of the trials and tribulations Mr. Williams had to overcome on his way to the Hall of Fame. Some of this comes from savingcountrymusic.com, so please check out their website. It's excellent. Hank Williams Jr.'s politics and boisterous attitude will always make him one of the most polarizing figures in country music history. But those who are quick to overlook his musical contributions, both on and off the stage, the amazing body of work he's amassed over his legendary career, and the mark he made on country music, are doing Bocephus and themselves a huge disservice. As he once famously sang about his father, let's not talk about the habits, just the music and the man. Hank Williams died when Hank Jr. was only 4 years old, and his mother Audrey immediately put Bocephus on the path to filling the void his famous father left behind, including playing Hank's songs while backed up by his father's famous drifting cowboy band for as many as 200 nights per year. By the time Hank Jr. was 14 years old, he began touring regularly with Audrey's Caravan of Stars. By the time he was 17, he was already married for the first time. And by 1966, the younger Hank had signed a recording contract with MGM. They were expecting to get the new version of the old Hank, and that's what they received. But buried deep inside Hank Williams Jr. was the yearning to break away from his mother's control, find his own voice, and become a star through his own efforts. And break away he did. Eventually, Hank Jr. moved away from Nashville to his father's home state of Alabama and severed ties with his mother. I can imagine how hard that must have been. From February through July of 1975, he recorded the album Hank Williams Jr. and Friends for MGM that included many of his own self-penned compositions and collaborations with Southern rock icons Charlie Daniels and Toy Caldwell. It was the moment Hank Jr. broke free from the preconceptions of who he should be as a musician and began to forge his own path. Rockin' Randall Hank was born. Most folks think of Bocephus as the boisterous singer of the Monday Night Football theme and a few other rowdy songs, but have no idea he's one of the most skilled instrumentalists that is also a performer in the history of country music. He may not have the licks of Jerry Reed, mind you, but Hank Jr. is an excellent lead guitar player, whether on an electric or an acoustic instrument. And that's just where his skill begins. Hank Williams Jr. is proficient on fiddle, banjo, dobro, piano and other keys, bass, electric and upright, harmonica, and even drums. Hell, the man's a one-man band. On August 8, 1975, Hank Jr. took a retreat to Montana and went climbing on a mountain called Ajax Peak. At about a 9,000-foot elevation, Hank Jr. slipped on a snowfield covering the side of the mountain and fell 500 feet. During the fall, Hank Jr.'s head impacted on several rocks jutting out from the snowfield, and then he landed face first on a boulder. When help arrived, they found the front of Hank Jr.'s head was split and fractured from his chin to his hairline. As one observer put it was like he had been struck dead center in the face with an axe. Hank eventually lost all his teeth. His gums were virtually gone. His right eye was hanging out of its socket, and part of his brains were exposed through his skull. My head was the size of a watermelon, Hank recalled. Since the location of Hank's fall was so remote, it took many hours to rescue him as he laid on the side of the mountain, clinging to life. A helicopter was radioed in, but since the location Hank Jr. was in was so remote, 6 men had to carry him a quarter of a mile to where the helicopter could land. 6 hours after the initial fall occurred, Hank Jr. finally arrived at the Missoula Community Hospital to receive treatment. Over the next 2 years, Hank Jr. would have 9 reconstructive surgeries on his face and head. Doctors told him initially he would never sing again. Boy, were they wrong. The numbers on Hank Williams Jr. during his biggest era from the late 1970s to the early 1990s are ridiculous, both in how prolific he was and how successful those albums and singles were. Get this, between 1979 and 1992, Josephus released 21 albums. That's basically an album every 8 months. And every single one of them was at least certified gold. In 1982 alone, he had 9 albums all on the Billboard Top Country album charts at the same time. During that same period, he also had 30 top 10 singles, including 8 number 1s. This all resulted in him being awarded the ACM Entertainer of the Year in 1987, 1988, and 1989, and CMA Entertainer of the Year twice. Though Josephus broke away from his mother Audrey to become his own man, he never strayed too far from the songs of his father, regularly recording Hank Sr.'s old classics or mentioning his father and his contributions in country music whenever he could. From new renditions of Move It On Over and Kalijah to songs like Living Proof and Family Tradition, Hank Jr. always made sure the world never forgot his father. Now this next part is from Waylon Jennings' biography. Quote, Hank Jr. is one of the best blues singers in the world, and on a good night, he can make his daddy look like a sharecropper. He's his own man, and I think I helped him come to terms with that. In 1978, we turned on the microphone and recorded the conversation. We won't talk about the habits, just the music and the man, which helped us both take a fond look at Hank Sr., who rode that thin line between crazy and a saint, making him still the most wanted outlaw in the land. When we got through, it said something about his daddy he had never thought about, especially concerning the relationship between his mom and dad. They loved each other too much, Hank Sr. and Miss Audrey, and basically destroyed each other completely. But there ain't a damn thing Hank could have done to change it. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Sure would help us out a lot with YouTube.